I haven't watched the original, so I don't know.
Wait, what?
No, that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, welcome everybody to this is the second week in a row we've been talking about Superman, and the deal is, it's a kind of a different crew than we had last week talking about the original Superman, which is great. We're going to get a plethora of voices. We're going to be talking about two movies tonight, Superman 2 and Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, which came out a number of years ago, and which I watched for the very first time in preparation for this show. I watched the original Superman 2 last year with my youngest, because we were kind of going on a superhero, classic superhero movie jag, because I had boycotted modern superhero films. Hey, there you go.
There you go.
Yeah, I should mention both of these movies are part of a 5-disc 4K set from Warner Brothers, which, hey, holding up the stuff. Available now from Warner Brothers Home Entertainment, as it were. And as we discussed last week, which was kind of interesting, like the Superman, the movie, which we discussed, it's not the kind of directory cut, the restored version they put out a number of years ago. So there are some actual differences, if you remember that version versus the, I guess, the theatrical, which is what they decided to put out. So we're going to be talking all about that with the sequel, which came out in 1980. And most people remember it as the movie where they gave us General Zod and Ursa and Non, and 3 superpowered Kryptonians who had been imprisoned in a giant rectangle, like a
shadow zone, trapezoid.
No, the Phantom Zone. Yes,
the Phantom Zone. Yes.
Basically looked like a big mirror.
Yes, or like something you do like a lot of coke off of in the late 70s. In fact, that's a missed opportunity right there.
Coke right
that
there.
Is super coke. Oh man, there's a picture now. Someone who has drawing capabilities have Jarrell doing lines on a mirror that is actually the shadow, the Phantom Zone mirror with them pressed up against the mirror.
Snort before Zod.
Yes, Jeff, you've got your marching orders right there.
Snort before Zod.
Oh, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge, I think, talking about both these movies, because in a lot of cases we talk about there's like the original version, like a director's cut, and there's a few differences here and there. These are drastically different films, not only in terms of, I guess, production quality, because there's a disclaimer at the beginning of the Donner cut saying it's a different version of the movie. Some of it was done with leftover footage, alternate takes, unfinished, effects work, and it definitely shows. It'd be nice if someday, I guess, someone did a restoration of the Donner cut to see what all these, especially the special effects scenes, look like with the tender loving care that they, I think, had been envisioned with. But let's kick things off with a where or how did you first encounter Superman 2? And did everybody love it as much as I did when I was, 5 years old watching it for the first time? I think this was my first real Superman movie. And it's definitely changed with experiencing it as an adult. But Jeff, I do want to start with you, because you were not able to join us last week.
Right.
And you had said on the show previous that Superman, the movie, is your favorite comic book movie. And we did mention that a bit last week on the episode. I want to know, how does the sequel stack up in your estimation? Is it in the same kind of class? Is it a big step down? Is it more of a lateral move? What do you make of Supes 2?
I think it's pretty close to the original. And that, I would say, with the Donner and Lester version, as well as the new Donner cut that we're sort of concentrating a little bit more on here. Superman, of course, I think, just as any film that is the first, has the added benefit of being the first and sort of setting the template. Obviously, Godfather 2, many people think that's a better film than Godfather. I don't think so, because it couldn't have done it without Godfather. I mean, so much of what we love in Godfather 2, as incredible as that film is, and it is incredible, is there because of all the groundwork that the Godfather laid. And I think the same here with Superman, but I liked it a lot. The one thing I will say that I think maybe on some levels, there's two things that I think Superman 2 may have had a little bit in sort of elevating the game, if you will, over Superman. One is I think the villains were much more villainous. I mean, my one criticism of the original Superman, as clever as Lex Luthor was, it was a little too Batman-ish to have Ned Beatty as this sort of oafish sidekick. And, you know, if Lex Luthor is so smart, why does he have that buffoon with him? He can't even go and get the paper without, you know, being attracting cops and everything else. But, you know, the villains here were very formidable. And Terrence Stamp played it snarlingly straight. I mean, there wasn't an ounce of winking at the audience or letting us know that this was comical. He played it like he was, you know, in a major 60s working man, British angry film drama. The other thing is I think they elevated the stakes with, you know, Superman giving up his powers for love. And, you know, certainly the romance between Lois and Clark, and really Superman now fully with her, was exceptional. And, you know, that was unseen at that time. So that was really kind of different here, you know, and in Superman, he keeps it all an illusion from her, where here they really went there, you know. It was almost like, you know, when Dave and Maddie or Sam and Diane kissed in Moonlight. It's like, wow, they went there, and it didn't ruin the franchise. In fact, it kind of made it wonderful. So I think it holds up really well. And some of it's funnier, some of it's a little bit odder. I mean, Richard Lester is an odd filmmaker. And, you know, the funny thing when you mentioned about, like, I hope that someday they'll put all the pieces together and color correct and everything. I would argue that about the original Superman too. I mean, Lois's hair was inconsistent from scene to scene. Some of the special effects were incredibly shoddy. I mean, that scene where the dad is being hoisted above the small town is, I mean, you can literally see through him. That's how bad that effect is. You know, some of Lester's jokes are really kind of land with a thud and stuff. So some of it's a little unfinessed. It needed another sort of round of editing or color correction, but still at the time, and even today, watching, you know, this past week for prep for the show, I was impressed at how many things they did really, real well. And, you know, it's a shame Christopher Reeve, those kind of performances didn't get nominated for Oscars, but man, he was so great in 1 and 2. I mean, when he tastes his blood for the first time after getting, you know, punched in the diner, that's palpable. I mean, oh my God, it's like, this is the first time this man has known vulnerability, other than, you know, sort of being made fun of in high school, but he wasn't aware of all of his powers then. How devastating that must be for him. And Christopher Reeve conveyed that. It really is a splendid performance. And I think that more than anything is probably why I think Superman is my favorite superhero movie, because it changed the game. It did so many things so well. And I don't know if there's really a star performance since then that's been as sort of impactful as Reeves' Superman. He made it possible for all the other people to follow and do it seriously and treat it with respect, and yet be funny, sexy, tough, adventurous, et cetera, et cetera.
I would argue, I think Downey as Tony Stark, I think he did. Yeah. He kind of revitalized it.
Yes.
You know, 20 plus years later, but
and I would say Tobey Maguire. Tobey Maguire, I think, as Spider-Man, did a really good job as well. Yeah. I mean, I think those three are kind of the seminal performances, but, you know, Reeves started all off. And the funny thing is, you know, we can sort of laugh at it now, but hot damn, you know, they had to take Wolverine out of the blue and yellow comic book underpants or PJs to make Wolverine work. Reeve made it work with red underwear over that blue Lycra. For God's sake, I can't believe he made that work. And we didn't sit there and go like, this looks ludicrous. On some levels it did, but he made it work.
That is something we didn't talk about last week, and maybe it's just for another time because I want to keep things moving. But
sure.
Yeah, there is that. I don't recall anybody ever criticizing the original Superman. I mean, I was, you know, 1 when it came out, but I never remember a conversation about, like, to your point, Jeff, oh, this looks ridiculous, this looks stupid. I almost wonder if the people got cold feet, like Bryan Singer and the rest, when it came to making those X-Men films, if they had just made comics accurate costumes. Yeah. If, you know, I mean, it was the late 90s, so maybe all the cynical Gen Xers would have been like, man, that's lame. But I don't know. That's an interesting alternate timeline I'd like to peek into. Mike, tell me about your experience with Soups 2.
Well, it's funny because I think I never really saw it until I was much older. And I knew about the Donner cut, and I think I saw the Donner cut before I saw the theatrical version. The only thing I remembered about Superman 2 vaguely from seeing the theatrical version was him taking off the S from his symbol and using it as a way to trap one of Zod's goons. whatever the name is of the one who is mute, who always goes
None.
and keeps
Yes.
grunting. But then when I discovered it later, and now I for once saw both of them back to back. I've seen the Donner cut and the original cut, or the theatrical cut, I should say, and both kind of work to their own advantages and disadvantages. I don't think one's particularly better than the other one, because with there's a scene with the Donner cut where Lois Lane, she's so hell bent on knowing that Clark Kent is Superman, she goes as far as to jump out of a window and risk her life, which I understand that's supposed to be like a character choice, but that seems a little extreme for anyone. And then later she's in and then later I think in the theatrical cut, she's in trouble in Paris and she's about to die, and the way that she finds out that Clark Kent is Superman works a lot better, I think, in the theatrical cut than the Donner cut. Because in the Donner cut, it was taken from a scene that they shot as a rehearsal where she holds a gun and she's like, "I'm sure you're Superman, and if this bullet will bounce off of you," and of course, she shoots at him, and of course it's a blank, and that's when he says, "You really could have hurt me if I was actually Superman," right? And
Wasn't actually, yeah.
Yeah, if it wasn't actually Superman. Yeah. So with the theatrical cut, I remember they're by the fireplace, he trips and his hand falls into the fire, and that's how he loses his glasses. And between those, I prefer the theatrical version, but both can be seen and both have their own strengths to their advantage. I'd say Superman 2 is one of the few sequels that was like the great superhero sequels that was it better than the original? No, but it definitely lived up to it in some respects, where you do elevate the stakes. You do have Lois Lane find out Superman's identity. You do have Superman take away his own powers only to get them back within like virtually the next scene at the diner. And you get these elements, and then of course you get the three villains who are far more of a threat than Gene Hackman. Like Gene Hackman is a great actor, but Lex Luthor, he's just a mortal. And as a mortal, he doesn't pose the same sort of physical threat as General Zod and his two other goons have. So yeah, I do enjoy both versions. I'm actually listening to the audio commentary track on the Donner cut now to see, what was there, what wasn't there. And yeah, it's interesting. I guess the Donner cut was actually formulated because the internet community back in 2006 wanted it to happen.
Yep.
Yeah, and because of them, that's how this movie got made. And I'm glad to see that the director's vision, or the closest thing to his vision, was made. And it's a fun thing to hold them up side by side. But luckily, I think they're both good in their own. They're both good. It's just that, it depends on what you prefer. I mean, for me, I prefer the Donner cut. And it's not like most other director's cuts where there's like 30 to 40 to an hour and a half minutes worth of additional material that doesn't need to be there. It's not like the Lord of the Rings like DVD huge DVD box sets.
Yeah.
Where, like Return of the King is like 4.5 hours. No,
yeah, I've got the extended DVD box set that when it came out with the 4 discs, and it took me all weekend just to get through the supplemental material on all the discs, and to watch the films alone is a commitment for a full day from when you get up to when you decide to go to bed, because each cut is like 4 hours each.
Yeah, it's insane. It makes me really looking forward to The Killer of the Flower Moon. But
how long is that one? That's I haven't seen the trailer. But it's the new Scorsese.
I think it's supposed to be like 3.5.
Man, he's got to climb back down from that Irishman standard.
You know what they should do with those movies? I don't understand why they don't do it with intermissions. They used to do intermissions.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Gone with the Wind and 39.
Titanic.
All of David, but they didn't have any intermission for that. But Dr. Zhivago, Sound of Music, Lawrence of Arabia, Bridge on the River Kwai, all Mad World had intermissions. Let people go out in the lobby, stretch their legs, take a trip to the bathroom or the concession stand for 50 minutes and come back.
Yeah, it was great when they had those, because I mean it's physically, well, first off, it's not very enjoyable to sit for that long in the theater for a movie. You get antsy, especially if it's a theater serving alcohol. You really have to pee then. So,
well, I think
in the music box and I'm going backstage to get like my usual drink there, I would never survive Space Odyssey if I drank anything.
Well, it's an endurance test for sure.
Yeah.
It's kind of a space odyssey within your own system there.
Right.
Not enough space odyssey in the bladder.
Exactly.
So Mark and Mike, we'll get back to you because you bring up a lot of good points, Mike, that I want to get into as far as the differences in which version is quote unquote better. I'm honestly of a mind to propose a third cut that combines elements from the two into a super cut. But Mark, tell us about Superman 2.
Well, first, if we're talking about Superman, I just have to,
Oh no.
Yeah, the DC shill is actually.
And you don't have a Superman T-shirt?
I know you're surprised. I'm Batman. I've
Oh,
always
Mark.
I've always been Team Batman. Sorry.
Even tonight.
Hey,
even tonight. But I love Superman. Don't get me wrong. I love the Reeve Superman films. Don't get me wrong.
Quick detour though before we begin. I'm sorry. I know the Flash had some like fan screenings last night, so there's spoils all over the internet. Beware. But after watching Superman 2 again, I kept thinking about the Flash trailer and what we've seen of it. We've got a superhero who gives up his powers just as the moment that General Zod invades the planet, leaving everybody vulnerable to attack.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
No, well, for so long I grew up with just the one cut of Superman 2, and that one was just fine. Watching the Donner cut again, it's been a while since I watched it, and I watched them actually back to back. I didn't know if I was going to make it on the show tonight, but I had two different sets of plans fall through, and I'm like, okay. So I watched them literally back to back.
Wow.
I'm going to say they're both entertaining. Superman 2 is far lighter than the Donner cut, the theatrical version. The Donner cut fits in a little better as far as the overall tone carryover from 1 versus 2. 2 definitely, the stuff they inserted, I get what they were going for, and they were trying to make the lighter comic book. The story, especially when you get into the Donner cut with the stuff with his dad, and Superman's arc is better in the Donner cut than it is in the theatrical cut. And you actually get to see Reeve exercise a little bit more of his acting chops, especially when he first makes a debate about losing his powers, and then the debate he has when he has to get his powers back. Christopher is fantastic in those. I'm watching those going, I'm loving these scenes in here. They could have worked this into the theatrical, I honestly think. So I'm kind of with you, Ian, that you could, to make it entertaining more for the masses, I think you could do another cut with these two together, because I think the story arc with not only Superman, but Lex is less jokey in the Donner cut than he is. He's still kind of light, but he feels far more like the Lex from the comics, who's got a little bit of sass to him, a little bit of sense of humor, but he's far more serious or more controlled, I should say, in the Donner cut than he is in the theatrical cut. On the other hand, I like Lois better in the theatrical cut, because there's the first scene when she is putting it together right at the beginning of Superman being, Clark Kent. There's this one shot of her that she just like, and I'm just like, oh, no. So, Lois, I liked a little better in theatrical, but I like the Superman and Lex parts in the Donner cut, and I also like a little bit more of how they explained it and fitted in the Donner cut with how the Shadow, how the Phantom Zone jail broke. It felt a little bit more like a continuation of the first one versus what they did with the Paris too. I like them both in their own way, but if you're talking about the story and watching them, I would sooner watch 1 and the Donner cut back to back, even with the rough VFX. And I don't like the way the Donner cut necessarily ends.
We'll talk about that.
That's the only part of the Donner cut I didn't really care for. But as far as feeling like a more continuous overall story, 1 to the Donner cut feels a lot more than 1 to 2, which 2 just has a drastic different feel to it. And the soundtrack, they couldn't get Williams back, so they've got here the soundtrack by Ken Thorne, which is Dollar Tree John Williams. He borrows most of his he borrows most of his sound cues from the original, and with it, because they had less of a budget for the orchestra when they redid the reshoots, they didn't have Williams anymore, so they had Ken Thorne come in and do the music for the theatrical cut. Unfortunately, they don't have the budget to get the orchestra back, but the record, as I showed before, does have a laser etched S.
I love those.
on
Yeah,
it,
those
so-
those kind of
Wow.
prismatic S symbols. That's great.
But sorry, long story short, too late. I would say they're both. I'm with your guys. There's merits to both. If I was going to watch them back to back, though, I would do one in the Donner cut.
All right, excellent. Well, we got everybody's kind of feelings out on the table. Let's pull over for some comments from our returning friend David Wilt. I read that the scene of Superman accidentally unleashing the Phantom Zone convicts was originally written for the original. From what I had heard, and Mike, maybe you picked up on some of this from the commentary. I haven't listened to it in a long time, but the original conception of these two films, as I understand, was as one long movie. And we kind of see that in here. I think that if they had, because there's so much going on in both Superman and Superman 2, no matter which version, it would have had to have been about 4 hours long, because it's still, you take out the montage stuff and the kind of the callbacks to the original, and it's still a long, kind of dense story. But yeah, the reason, and I can kind of understand, seeing Superman 78, back when it first came out, the whole trial of Zod and his compatriots in the beginning doesn't really go anywhere. That's strictly for the beginning of the film. You see them spinning away in the Phantom Zone. You could be wondering at the end of the movie, well, what was that whole first 15 minutes about, besides establishing that, Kal-El or Jor-El was a lawyer? It is kind of nice to see it, a reprise in the sequel.
They do mention it in the extra material that they were intending initially to shoot them back to back. The first 3 discs of that set you guys have wonderful behind the scenes, almost hour-long stuff that they shot with stuff that I didn't know, that I found fascinating. And then they did Quest for Peace, and the extra that they threw on there, the 50th anniversary, it's the weirdest special I've watched for a superhero show, and it goes on the weirdest disc of the Superman movie, so I guess it's fitting. But they did intend to shoot these back to back. They did shoot them back to back.
Well, most of the... Oh, good.
I was going to say, I didn't watch the Quest for Peace stuff yet, but did they include the Bizarro cutscene?
Yeah, well, yeah, no, there's a half an hour of deleted scenes in the Quest for Peace disc.
Yeah, that's coming up. All right. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think ultimately, in some respects, both of these versions, I think, reflect the villainy of the Salkinds and Spengler in skimping on some of the money, some of the artistic integrity, if you will, of Donner and what he was trying to do. I think it could have been a more appropriate opening if it had somehow come back and even set up sort of properly the sequel, which I always thought it was kind of there to suggest to us that maybe that would be it, and or if not literally, and with it the way Donner wanted to sort of. But it is funny how there's so much great in these movies, and Richard Lester is a terrific director. He did a great job on Hard Day's Night and the Musketeers movies, but they brought him in here and basically he was instructed to joke it up, and he did that. And yet I have to think, I think as I look at especially the 2 cuts back to back and revisiting Superman 2 and that I hadn't probably in a decade or so, I think they stick out like a sore thumb. I think they feel very, very silly, almost too silly, where a lot of that battle is pretty interesting. I mean, like here's what Non does, and then here's how Superman has to think to sort of defeat him, because he can't just defeat him with necessarily mano a mano fisticuffs, et cetera, et cetera. But they're both good, and Superman 2 at the time was very well received and very well done. But poor Richard Donner kind of got crapped on a little bit by those skinflint producers. By the way, do you know that Richard Donner was not originally intended to shoot Superman? They were originally going to give it to Guy Hamilton, the guy who shot Goldfinger, but because of the tax situation in England and his situation, he could not shoot on the Pinewood Studios because of his tax situation. It was originally going to be shot in America, and then when they ended up shooting most of Superman in Pinewood Studios, they had to change it, and Donner got the job, who was at that time kind of a work for hire, doing all kinds of different things, but he had just done The Omen, which seems like the oddest choice for Superman. But I think honestly, it may have been very well that he was able to take something that was arguably, if you want to get down to brass tacks, claptrap, and make it really work, where comic book heroes, especially a guy flying around in blue tights, is kind of claptrap too. But he really made well, and I think by and large, despite the comedy in it, Donner played it very, very straight by and large, other than maybe the Otisburg character, because the love story came through, and Superman's pain and angst when Lois dies, or when he gives up his powers. I mean, that stuff, like I said, I don't want to keep using the word, but it's very palpable. And Donner was very good at making that come through. And I think the same with The Omen, where all that sort of craziness and the odd deaths were devastating. David Warner to this day can still not watch himself get beheaded in The Omen, because Donner did such an awesome job making it even in slow motion to look at this, folks. Isn't this awful? Yeah, it is. And I'm going to make you buy it.
It's a bit of a digression, but I mean, you bring up, in addition to Richard Donner, I'm thinking of Bob Clark, who made three classics within their respective very different genres.
Yes.
Black Christmas, also starring featuring Margot Kidder.
Yep.
And
Porky's.
Yep.
And A Christmas Story.
Yeah.
And
How does that work?
Can I also say this too,
Yeah.
while we're celebrating Bob Clark? He also did Murder by Decree, which was up until really probably the Downey version, or the Sherlock series with Cumberbatch and Freeman, one of the more well-respected modern versions of Sherlock Holmes, with Christopher Plummer and James Mason making a terrific duo in that. And that's available, I think, on Amazon Prime for those who are Bob Clark fans, because he was very capable. And then I think did he do The Silent Partner, or am I wrong on that?
I don't know. I haven't seen either of those, but I'll have to check them out. Bob Clark doing Sherlock Holmes. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But okay, so
that was actually Curtis Hanson. Pardon me. Sorry.
Wait, what?
Silent Partner was done by Curtis Hanson, who did LA Confidential.
Yeah, I was going to say that. For some reason, I always thought of Curtis Hanson as being a younger director, but that's apparently not true. Well, he's also dead now. All right, so we're gonna do a fly around back to Superman 2. Dave Smith also says the running gag of the character Zod that Earth is called Planet Houston. Yeah.
And
it's a great point, David.
It's a great gimmick, and it works better, in all honesty. And I'm sorry I keep bringing it up, but that's part of the show. Is the Donner cut? It works a lot better than it did in the theatrical cut, only because they use it not quite as much, and the way it's just delivered and the way it's cut is better. Also, with the way they handle the villains, you're right. Now it makes more sense, Jeff, when you said they brought in Lester to lighten it up, because the villains are far more serious in the Donner cut. We don't have Anon trying to do his fire thing. He just comes right out in the Donner cut, and he can use it right away, which makes more sense than him doing the little jokey thing, and still him looking for approval from Zod, makes sense. It's just, I really like the way they edited the villains, especially in the beginning part of this film, better. And the Zod Houston gimmick works better there, because they use it at a little bit more natural points than they do in the theatrical cut.
Well, to that point, Mark, it's not played. It's kind of funny, but it's not played as a joke in the Donner cut. You're like, oh, well, they came upon some astronauts on a space mission, and one of them, I think they had the Houston patch, or maybe you heard him talk on the radio or something, and so they assume that's where they come from. That's Planet Houston. It only makes sense. Whereas, it's a cute bit, but it's not played for laughs. See, one more from Mr. Wilt. In the opening of the original theatrical version, it shows clips from the original. There's actually a bit of that
during the credits.
That didn't work so well.
Right, but in the Donner cut, it's more woven into bringing us up to speed, and not necessarily previously on like a TV show.
Well, and the Donner cut brings it full circle and explains why you got that scene in the first 15 minutes of the first film. It brings it back around a lot better than you doing the montage, and
Yeah.
I think it comes around better, and you also the theatrical version have them getting captured by breaking a red crystal. We don't know what the red crystal means or whatever. All of a sudden they just get trapped. It's like, huh? Where at least in the Donner cut, we get a little bit better history of Zod and the villains and making them even more villainous in that.
Well, they also the guard who's watching that red crystal, he looks like something out of he looks like a snow trooper from Star Wars with a Superman S on his chest for some reason. I don't know. Oh, speaking of Superman's S, the bit where in the Donner cut where Clark is having the conversation with Jor-El about giving up his powers, you've got Lois up on this kind of like a cliff essentially in the Fortress of Solitude, wearing Superman's shirt and watching this entire thing. It didn't work for me because at no point did maybe she was nervous or something to interrupt to say, wait, you're going to do what now? I mean,
but she didn't do that in the theatrical cut either, though.
I know,
but neither choice. You're right.
Lois Lane makes a lot of weird choices, jumping out windows and trying to shoot at a man with a gun, even if it was a blank. And somehow she's always in danger. No matter where she goes, she's going to die, and she's going to be rescued by Superman. That even carried over to Man of Steel, where, Lois Lane was practically the only person Superman saved in that movie. Everybody else he just killed by accident.
Well, but I would draw kind of a distinction between she's not exactly, even though she is literally at points a damsel in distress in this movie, she has at least, I'm going to bust out the A word, the agency of getting into these situations because she is such a dogged reporter going in search of the story. So she gets into these situations. It's not like she's sitting on a park bench and then all of a sudden Lex Luthor strolls by and, picks her up and throws her in a van. She is in Superman, the revelation of Superman on the scene is her trapped in that wonderful scene of her trapped in the helicopter and dangling over the city. I, didn't remember the Paris scene from the theatrical cut, even though I'd watched this last year. So watching the Donner cut, I'm like, there's something missing here, but I don't know what. I actually didn't mind the omission of the Paris terrorist heist scene. I loved what was going on in that newsroom. Mark, I know you mentioned that Lois kind of makes these kind of weird expressions when she puts two and two together, but I feel like that's a natural thing because she looks over, she sees Clark Kent coming into the room, she sees Superman on that page, and she sits there and draws the hat and the glasses on him. I would probably have the same reaction, and I feel like it's more natural of her doing that, applying her reporting skills throughout this version of the film. The whole thing with the gun, like in the theatrical version, I think she throws herself over Niagara Falls or something.
Yeah,
like
she
that.
does.
So
she throws herself in the river. Yeah,
right. There are these parallels between the two, but it felt more like a through line of her continuing to do her job in the Donner cut. Help me out here, though. I know I'm jumping around, but we got a lot of ground to cover in 25 minutes. In both cuts, Superman gives up his powers. He and Lois Lane drive. Where did they get the car? Going from the North Pole to wherever they end up? Was it? I don't know.
Who knows?
Yeah. How did they get to the car and how? Well, I mean, I guess in Richard Donner's point of view, this is a film that, is supposed to suspend your disbelief and you're not supposed to think too much into it. But still, it's a good point. Because
I mean, at least Lex Luthor, you see him and Miss Tessmacher in the first one, like taking the balloon and then the snowmobile
jet.
or whatever. Yeah. But in this one, they go to this little, I guess, not a mining town, but it's someplace way up north where there's a lot of snow. And Clark gets into a fight with Rocky, the local bully, and gets his clock cleaned. And as you mentioned, the seeing blood for the first time, his own blood. He walks back to the Fortress of Solitude. This isn't a point where it's like, oh, I'm Superman, I don't need, I've got superhuman heat.
He needed a better coat than the windbreaker he had on.
He at least needed gloves. I'm sitting there thinking like he'd be frozen to death before he got within 1,000 feet of the Fortress of Solitude.
That's been the weak point in either cut for me too, is just a weak point. But at that point, I'm like, okay, whatever. It's one of those points to where I'm like sitting there going, I just want to get him to the next point. I get they could have done that better, fully admit, but for me, it was a minor thing because I'm like, if we start to nitpick that, you could nitpick that on a number of other films. Well, how did they get here so fast, or how did they, So for me, I guess my suspension is, it is okay. Just get me to that point. I'm sorry. I guess for me, it's not that important of a factor for me. And time is weird in here anyway, because you get the scene earlier when our three villains are in the White House, and Zod's talking about how he's been doing the same thing for a few days. So they've been there a little while. He's been doing the same thing. Yes, I am the king of the world. I was the king of the world yesterday, and I was the king of the world the day before that. I mean, so time in either cut is not conveyed the best of just how long these events went on.
Well, they do bring it. They do try and, I think, tie it together a little bit, because in the diner, after Clark gets beaten up, the one guy, the owner, turns on the television, and Zod is calling out Superman, and Clark's like, when did this happen, or how long has this been going on? He's like, where have you been? So yes, it has been probably a half a week or so since they showed up and started making their presence known on Earth. But no, I understand your point about nitpicks, but and perhaps it's because I was hyper attuned to looking for differences between two versions of movies. I'm looking for details, and it's just something that sticks out, because I feel like the rest of the movie, and I'm sure someone out there can comment and find 50 other examples of how both movies are problematic, but it sticks out. It's like, oh, we're pretty tight on a lot of other details, but this somehow it got through.
It is tight, though. I will say Luther and Miss Texmacher going out to the Fortress of Solitude works a lot better in the Donner cut than it did in the theatrical cut. I liked that better. They have the same conversation, but they don't composite the Arctic on there. They immediately start having a better exchange of dialogue between the two in the hot air balloon before they get to the Arctic. And in fact, Texmacher gets to show a little bit of wit when he goes, go north, and she's like, north is that way. She gets a chance to show a little bit of gusto, and then they cut from that to another scene, and when they come back, they're on the snowmobile, rather than a longer scene with them in the balloon with the conversation, which they're re-delivering it again, and I think they delivered it better the first time. So as far as their travel out to the fortress, I like theirs a lot better in the Donner cut. I think it worked better.
Agreed. I want to talk about the sacrifice, because you mentioned the Fortress of Solitude. It comes back in a major way at the end of the Donner cut, because Clark gives up his powers. Now, what we don't get in the Donner cut is the whole like kind of romantic notion of like Clark in that neatly pressed white shirt and his flowing Luke Skywalker hair, taking Lois Lane over to this weird hanging silver papasan to make love. They essentially, they just
cut. Yeah,
I think there was a thermal blanket there, Ian.
Yeah. So they have a bed there, and then how did he find food when they wanted to eat?
Well, that's the other thing.
He flew out to get.
Yeah,
he carried it out.
Cold flying that bad.
He's got
he melts his
eyes,
kitchen.
that he can.
Does he just put it in the molecule chamber to heat it up?
Yeah. Well, there you
go.
He's
got the eyes.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the eyes. He's got the eyes.
Fire eyes.
Yeah, which is the souffle scene they cut out, but it's on the Donner cut DVD, Blu-ray. They've got one deleted scene on there, and it's Superman trying to make a souffle with his heat vision with Lois Lane.
See, I think it's interesting that you guys are sort of getting into the specifics about how did this happen. I'd like to know why Lois's hair changed from shot to shot in some of the scenes. I mean, that's the Drew mistakes here. The other stuff you can argue is like movie logic that always takes major leaps. But here it's like, why is Lois's hair black in this scene? And her bangs are here. And in the next cut, it's brown and it's longer and it's well past her. Those kind of things are sloppy. And yet the Salkinds didn't give a shit. They just said, screw it. Throw it into the kids won't notice. Well, thankfully, the bigger themes we all noticed mostly and talked about those. But those kind of mistakes are just egregious. They're so avoidable.
There was the one scene, it's the scene in the Donner cut with Lois Lane shooting Superman. That entire scene, when Clark walks into the hotel room, he's wearing, I think, like dark brown glasses, and he has kind of like that big sweeping hair. As he cuts between, to the close-ups, he's got like the close cropped, like almost alfalfa plastered to his face hair and giant black like horn rimmed glasses, and they keep cutting back and forth. He changes like several times throughout that scene. I actually really like that bit where she shoots him. It is so odd. It's not Richard Lester goofy, but it's kind of like, again, Lois is I feel like Superman would have had to have rescued her from that situation if she had shot Clark Kent, but it's that same gusto that she applies to everything else in her life. I'm going to do this crazy thing to get the truth.
Well, what I like about the shoot scene in Donner versus the scene we get in the theatrical is because she just watched a kid jump over the rail and Superman rescue, and she doesn't say it feels repetitive, but then, you're not Superman, but like, not even 20 seconds later, he falls into the fire and he's revealed he's Superman again. It's like, why even do that subterfuge to where here in the Donner cut, it flows a little better. She's still kind of piecing it together, but she's like, okay, and then she still suspects, but she plays it off a lot better in the Donner cut than the other one where she, look, I'm going to throw myself into the river now because you're Superman. And I'm just like, we just watched someone fall over there. You're going to do that same gimmick again.
It's also the one criticism. Well, it's a big criticism. It's towards the end of the movie, but they repeat the planet time rewinding thing, which I give the theatrical all the way.
Yeah,
I'm with you. That was that seemed. But you wonder. I mean, someday we'll maybe get even the fuller story than we've already got. But everything I've read or watched or heard about it is that they didn't give Donner a proper budget. The Salkinds were playing, almost like a rich man deciding whether he's going to give his kid enough money for ice cream or not. And, you can see in some of the scenes where it's very meticulously planned out. I don't want to harken back to the first film, but after Superman drops Lois off from their flying date, there's a tracking shot that is her going from the terrace to the room, and then you see Superman fly away in the back, and then he comes out as Clark Kent in the front. Even when I was watching that in school, when I was watching that scene, it was like, wow, how'd they do that? I mean, it was tricky enough and self-conscious enough that you go like, wow, that's pretty clever how they really suggest that he can change that quickly in just a few seconds and somehow even get inside the building. Bravo. And yet then they had sloppy scenes where Superman's costume is green when he's flying out in front of the Hoover Dam. And there's really bad scenes in some of the modeling shots and some of those kind of things. Even when Superman says, "Would you like to step outside, General?" and he lands on the flagpole. Oh my God, it's terrible. And I mean, I really can't believe that if Donner had the right amount of time or money, or Lester for that matter, that they would have ever allowed something like that when they can do those other effects so well. When Superman flies the first time and we see him, he comes right in front of the camera, and that, I mean, they said they did that like for half a day to get that perfect because they had to live up to that hype. You will believe a man can fly. And yet the Salkinds started cutting budgets and timetables left and right, and it shows.
Speaking of that scene with the Superman landing on the flagpole, I got to give it to the theatrical version because that step outside is great because they're several stories up and it's wonderful. In the Donner version, he says, "Haven't you heard of freedom of the press?"
Yeah, that's not a good line.
No, it's not a good line. No.
Talking about special effects, my wife pointed this out to me, and I rewound this section probably 4 times. It was like the superheroes Zapruder film. In the Battle
that's
of
fun.
Metropolis at the end, where Zod and his compatriots are, using their super breath to blow people away. If you look, and it's not in every scene, but you can, once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. There are scenes that showing the scared citizens running, all over the
Oh,
place,
yeah,
and
yeah.
cars blowing up and stuff.
Uh-huh.
Do you know what I'm getting at, Mark?
Oh, I know exactly what you're getting at. It's literally the old school electric football game, to where you have the little figures on either side of the street, and they're literally
They're on a
little
conveyor
meeples.
belt.
They're little meeples on a conveyor
Yeah,
belt, and
yeah.
they're just little colored pigs. But then again, we get Shitty Dummy on Hoover Dam, at Niagara Falls too, being
But I'm
thrown
telling you,
over the edge. But
that Metropolis scene, that was
Yeah.
Shitty Dummy. That was the zenith of Shitty Dummy
It
action, because
was.
it's not like they're just like going in a conveyor belt. You see some of those like tip over. Like,
Well, yeah, you
what?
see some of them tip over, and some of the matchboxes coming in. But my understanding is that kind of some of those effects were shot near the end, where they were tightening their budget a bit as well. So it's one of those things to where they could have done that better. Absolutely.
And
but,
what's the most ironic about all that too? I don't think anybody really, other than talking about the shortcomings of this film in
Mhm.
forms like this, which is great. When you talk about the memory of even Superman, for that matter, I don't think the action scenes are the stuff that really sticks in people's heads.
Mhm.
I think it's all the characterization and Reeves' performance and the chemistry between Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve, and even the scrappiness of her. There's only one P in rapist.
Yeah.
She's a great reporter, but she's not a really good speller. Thank God Jimmy Olsen's around to take photographs and be her proofreader. But I mean, I think that's the kind of stuff that comes through, and all this stuff that they worried about, and the sort of pure action parts of it. Some of it's very well. I mean, Superman reverses the world, and he's chasing after the missiles and stuff like that. But for all the time spent fighting and throwing buses around and little football player people in the streets of New York, I don't think most people think that fondly of that. At least that's not the main remember from these movies. I think you look at it, and to your point, Ian, what do we remember from Iron Man, the first one? Yeah, there's a lot of great action in it, and there always is, but hot damn, the thing you remember is like, wow, Robert Downey Jr. is awesome in this. And he hasn't looked back. He, before that, he was fifth bill on, and lucky to have the job on Ally McBeal. And here suddenly he's like, wow, he just did like maybe the greatest superhero performance other than Christopher Reeve. And now we're set, MCU.
And I love that Iron Man 1 had the balls to end the big comic book movie on a press conference.
Yeah.
That's right.
I am Iron
and
Man,
the
and
announcement
boom.
who he is, the destruction of his identity, which is genius.
Yeah.
It's like, what an ending.
Yeah, where most superheroes would never reveal who they are. This guy not only reveals it, but kind of brags about it. And of course, he carried that on into story 2, where he has a big party and they get drunk and he gets in a fight with War Machine and trashes his house. It was all great character stuff to follow by.
And I think even, today with most of the stuff that we like, I think as we've talked about it and stuff, that stuff shines through. I mean, even Spider-Man. I mean, I would argue that in Spider-Man, Peter Parker was more interesting than Spider-Man.
Yeah. And that dichotomy was there throughout like all 3 movies. It really was in some level about that dichotomy of the superhero and that responsibility, but also responsibility to protect the people that he loved. And that, those movies are I'm talking about the Tobey Maguire version.
Yeah, for sure.
Gets lost.
I mean, the whole
Garfield
scene at the
Holland,
end where he catches the thing from crashing on Mary Jane, and Ock saves his reputation and sort of humanity by pulling down, "I will not die a monster," which is genius. but at the same time, it's the revelation that Mary Jane sees that he's Peter Parker. I mean, to me, I'll take that over, the subway fight, which is great. But to me, even the subway fight between him and Doc Ock, the stuff you remember is that he saves it at the end, and then he's carried out by the people on the subway. So it's funny, as much money as we have to spend on these effects all the time, and sometimes they don't come out very good. We don't even really talk about them as much, except when we talk about maybe they weren't quite up to snuff.
well, superhero movies all have the same thing in common, where the superhero quits the job halfway through. Superman lets go of his powers to quit. Spider-Man lets go of his powers to quit. And then in Dark Knight Rises, Batman quits for 10 years because, you know, of what happened to his girlfriend and what happened to Harvey Dent and the image of hope in Gotham. So they all have those reoccurring themes that's really kind of copied off of Superman. Any superhero movie you see today was or is successful because of what Superman did all the way back then. Because it wasn't
great
just
point.
fun popcorn entertainment. It actually had a lot of meaning to it. You know, this is a story about someone. When I watched Superman again for the first time, not the first time, but like for the first time in a while, it just reminded me so much of what made Man of Steel not work. And the reason that movie didn't work is because Superman is incredible, not because of his powers, but because of his restraint and his kindness and how he's always out there to help save people. Where in Man of Steel, they throw away him trying to help people in order to just basically have disaster porn and just throw as much destruction at the screen as possible. Anyway, sorry, I was going off on a little rant.
No, I think it's a really well said point.
Well, and I think, and Mark, I was actually thinking of you when I was watching, you know, all three of these movies, Superman, and then both cuts of Supes 2. You know, we're due for a 10-year revisit, I think, of Man of Steel, because that came out in 2013. Because I haven't watched it in a long time, and I'm wondering how my estimation of it, you know, might have changed. Because that's the thing, I love Henry Cavill. I just don't like the direction that Snyder took him in, but and I'm getting off on a tangent here, but yeah, I might be a little more receptive to looking at that movie again, a film I think I had vowed never to watch.
No, you guys will just all still hate it. That's fine. I'll just sit here and enjoy it, so that's okay.
Hey! I have been,
but you know, it's
around on a number of films.
But it's funny. I think you hit a bigger point, Ian, and maybe one of the reasons why some of I know that you've sort of shunned some of the MCU, and maybe there's just too much of all this stuff. But I think there is a glumness that has kept things from being fun in a lot of across the thing. And MCU is starting to get a little bit there. I know I was complaining about that a few weeks ago in regards to Guardians of the Galaxy, and was the cheese standing alone on that one. However, the one thing I will say about both, I think, Superman and then sort of Batman right after, which I think sort of cemented where we're now in the world today as far as movies going, with those two big hits, and maybe Star Wars as kind of a new superhero version of it in a way. Even if they got a little bit dark or a little sad or whatever, they were still fun. I mean, when Superman loses his powers and gets his clock cleaned in the diner, it's like, holy crap. And yet you also sit there and go like, how's he going to get out of this one? This is cool. As opposed to, gosh, who's going to pay for all those buildings that Superman's destroying in Man of Steel? That's what I kept thinking about. Like, you know, and I thought the perfect button for that movie would have been like, you know, everybody's lost money on the buildings being destroyed except for Luthor Glass, you know, and then Lex Luthor's like, you know, this Superman might be the best thing that ever happened to me and the worst. But they didn't have that fun with it. But I think Superman has a lot of fun, even when it gets dark in the second version.
Well, to your point, Jeff, and you know, I want to be fair to Man of Steel because I haven't watched it in 10 years.
Yeah.
But it recalls something you said earlier, which is, you know, the siege of Metropolis at the end of that movie goes on for like 35 minutes or something like that. Right, you know, and the effects were state of the art and, you know, pretty spectacular. I think that might be why a lot of people had problems with it, because it was so, you know, realistic and like, oh my God, I feel like I'm watching 9/11 all over again.
Yeah, right.
But when you take that compared to a 5-minute, not even like maybe from end to end diner scene of Clark Kent thinking, you know, kind of forgetting that he's not Superman, but still wanting to be Superman in terms of standing up for people and whatever, that's more thrilling than, you know, 30 minutes of throwing people through buildings. Now we are kind of coming towards the end here, and I do want to talk about the ending, because Superman goes back and reverses time again. And it's especially because I watched these movies within a week of each other. It's like, and then this time I think it almost lessens the impact of the first film, because at the end of Superman the movie, when he's flying around the planet, he's got, you know, tears streaking out of his eyes, and he's like screaming and everything, and it's really kind of sad, and he's hoping it'll work. In this one, he's literally flying in the reverse order, and he's got this big like cheesy grin on his face, and there's kind of like a stutter to his movement, and I don't know what is going on there. But the biggest problem I have is the way that this movie ends. At the end of Superman 2, the theatrical version, he gets his powers back, and he revisits the diner, and he punches Rocky down the diner into the pinball machine. I could let that go. I wasn't thinking about it until I watched the Donner cut. But what he does, that is not Superman. That's Batman. That is revenge. And I actually got into a bit of a spat with my wife at the end of watching the Donner cut the other night, because she was like, well, I mean, the guy was a bully. I'm like, yes, but when Superman turns back the planet and then goes to that diner, Rocky has no idea who this guy is that's coming in there and just punching him in the face.
Well, no, he still kind of plays it like he knows him.
I know, and that's a problem of the editing. That is not.
Right. Well, it's a problem with both films that I had, though, with the ending. I had a problem with him turning back time at the end of the first one, too, because the time, when you get into time, they need to leave time things alone, because him even doing the rotating of the earth in the first one didn't make a lick of sense of how it plays out, because he rotates time, yet she's still buried in the stones at the end. In this one, he rotates back time, and some things come back, but some things people forget. That's the problem with both films. I've never agreed with either film the way it ends with the both returning to turn back a time.
Right. But here's the thing: in the theatrical cut of 2, they don't do the time reversal thing. Clark just gets his powers back. He's defeated Zod and his cronies, and then he decides, a nice little button on the film, oh, we're going to go back to the diner, and Rocky's going to get his. It's a bit unfair, and that's putting it mildly, because this is no longer Clark Kent roughing up this guy. It's Superman pretending to be Clark Kent to rough up this guy and get revenge, which again is not part of Superman's ethos, really. But at the end of this movie, let's just assume that we don't have any problems with the intricacies of time travel. The fact is, he's still reversed time back before he would have encountered Rocky. And so, there's just a guy, he's coming off the road. He wants to have his, steak or whatever, his minute steak. And then this dude comes in, gives him some lip and then shoves him across the counter. Yes, he's a bully, but it's almost like, and my wife put it this way, she's like, what if there's like a notorious mobster hitman, having lunch in a diner, and you came across him, you wouldn't do anything? Like, no, because he hasn't done anything. You can't just go around enacting vigilante justice, especially because you don't know if, this person has turned over a new leaf, 5 minutes before you got there, and has, gone to confession, or has, opened up a charity for kids to make up for the fact that he's been a jerk his entire life. You don't get to do that and still call yourself a superhero.
To that point, too, I think even the bigger ending is, which was, that's kind of I agree with you on that. It's a kind of an unfortunate button on a couple of levels, even though it's funny and got a big audience reaction when I saw it in the theater. But the real ending is that he kisses away Lois's memory. And like, I think if they were more daring as filmmakers, and part of it was the time, and they didn't want to make it too heavy, but I think it would have been interesting to give us a little bit of an ending, sort of like Spider-Man 2, where he walks away from Mary Jane, and she doesn't know why, but he does. And I wished in some ways it was almost the reverse with Superman, is like where she goes, and I'm going to be jealous of the entire world. It's like, and that's what happens. Now let's see how it plays out. And maybe for the button there, you do, I don't know, a funny thing like the next day he comes in as Clark and he goes, hey, Lois, you want to go get coffee? And she goes, if you're treating Clark, and like she's playing along with it a little bit because she is scrappy and she's a survivor and she's pretty ballsy. But, in some respects, Superman gets almost everything to go his way. And I'm not sure that that's as mature or interesting of an ending as it might have been if Lois was saved and he reversed Zod and the chamber and all that, but somehow there's still repercussions from decisions he made throughout that story.
The kiss would work a lot better if Lois didn't actually forget, but Superman thinks she forgets and she plays it like she forgets.
Oh,
that would have made the kiss where you could still pull it off. And then Lois, knowing that secret, like you said, Jeff, could play it off a little more, but she's not letting Superman know that she's still aware, Clark, that she's still aware of it. I think that would have worked a lot better. I never liked the kiss forget either. It's like both Superman movies, don't get me wrong, I love them. I love Reeve. I love the stories. I don't like the way these movies end. Almost none of them. It's like they couldn't quite come up with it because they're still learning, they're still feeling it out.
Right.
They couldn't quite come up with an ending. They felt like they needed to go here when, like we said, you get later on in, even in Batman and even in, Iron Man and even in Spider-Man 2 and all that, you get these more subtle endings than these more kind of creeper endings.
So
why does he have to be alone?
Superman, me too.
Yeah.
What?
Well, let's not forget.
Superman makes you forget about consent.
Let's not forget that in the first film, in the theatrical cut, Superman's trying to mac on like every female office person in there. He's like, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And they're just ignoring him. But still, I'm watching this going, "Wow, dude."
Yeah, you're right, Mark. Both endings have problems. I mentioned earlier that I'd like to see a super cut of this, yes, pun intended, because one of the things, like the big showdown at the Fortress of Solitude at the end is, I liked this stuff. As cheesy as the giant cellophane S was, I did also like the teleporting, kind of fooling, Zod and Non and all that stuff. That was nice, and I kind of missed it from the confrontation there. There are elements of both that work, but
how did you like the fact that they couldn't get Hackman back, so they had like this stuntman who looked like something out of a Benny Hill sketch, and they didn't even get a decent voice substitute for him. They couldn't find anybody who could imitate Hackman better than that. I mean,
for which part? What I missed?
In the Fortress of Solitude, there's scenes where he's being lifted onto ledges, and it's clearly a stuntman in a wig, and it's not Hackman, and a couple of voiceovers he's doing are not Hackman. It's like, wow. Just, I mean, that sloppiness and the cost cutting was shocking. It was kind of startling then. It's even worse when you look at it and go like, they would not let that shit go today.
Well, speaking of Hackman and shoddiness, in the scene where he and Otis are in the prison laundry, first of all, the guy that Otis kind of gets in trouble for bad mouthing, I noticed his prison number was 6969. I appreciate that. But looking at Hackman, it's probably the HD. I don't know if this would have come across as much on the big screen in 78, but you can clearly tell he just has like a close shaved, like a close cut hairdo with a really bad bald wig, because it's like you can see the dark brown of his hair coming through that wig. I'm like, what do you just shave? All right.
And you know what's weird about that too, Ian? Hackman was virtually bald. I mean, he was doing the comb over since Bonnie and Clyde, and never sang for my father. Why did they just say, look, Gene, for 3 months you can shave your head?
Well, he didn't want to wear a skull cap in the first one. In fact, he didn't want
to be bald at all. That's why they kept having to put weird wigs on him.
Well, in the first one, according to the behind the scenes, it wasn't even wigs. The hairstylist kept coming up with wild hairdos to make it look like a wig because Hackman did not want to shave his head.
Right.
Man, that's gonna be a challenge. I want you to give me a hairstyle that makes it look like I'm wearing a wig. Huh? All right. Well, any closing thoughts on Superman 2? I don't think we've come to a verdict. I think, as we've all kind of discussed, both movies have their pluses and their minuses. They're both worth watching, and they're both, I didn't watch them back to back or anything, as some of you guys did, and bless you for it. That's a great effort on your part. But it is one of those situations where it's not just little differences here and there. They are truly different, unique experiences with different tones, and they're both worth checking out and doing your own kind of comparison. But any final thoughts on Superman 2?
I have one. I think, speaking of hairstyles, I think it's funny that they basically put E.G. Marshall in a Ronald Reagan wig, knowing that he was going to probably become president before the film was released. So they had the foresight to say, let's make him look like Reagan. And it's an old Hollywood actor from the 40s and 50s too, which was like just so somebody's big in joke. There are a number of in jokes. 6969. Do you like pink? All kinds of dirty double entendres throughout both films. And then, of course, the Reagan wig. and E.G. Marshall playing him.
Did anyone else
Definitely.
notice the product placements in the big Metropolis?
Yeah.
Totally.
Between Coca-Cola, Marlboro, and JVC.
Oh yeah.
And then of course people complained about that in Man of Steel, but I'm like, well, they did that originally too. Also, people complained about Superman breaking Zod's neck in Man of Steel.
He kills him in this one.
Yeah, and he does it with a smile. Yeah, which is the weirdest thing.
We don't know if he might have just gotten a bad cold falling down that chute of snow.
That is a great
sure.
There could have been something soft underneath he lands on, but
he lost all of his powers, so he's walking back wishing he had gloves, just like Clark in that long scene.
Well, he could have fallen into the Arctic or whatever, been frozen and preserved, so he could be brought back like Megatron and Transformers 2,
or the Thing.
Or the Thing, yes.
There you go.
But I forgot one thing I wanted to mention was the consequences of Clark giving up his powers in the Donner cut, because the theatrical, they didn't get Brando on screen really at all, except for the kind of flashback material.
Yeah.
But he makes it very clear. He's like, son, I knew this day might come. So yes, you can give up your powers, but you can never get them back. And then, as we established, like a day later, he's like, son, I knew this day would come, and you can, and you can get your powers back, but you'll never be able to see me again. And he's like, screw it.
They cut out the interim scene where Jor-El says, ask your mother.
Well, what? See,
and then
what
Suzanne York shows up.
She wears the cape in the family.
Yeah, that's right.
I will say, I did like how that was played in the Donner cut, though, because it gave a little bit more gusto for Superman to get his powers back, to give something up. That's why, like I said, I like the arc of his character a little bit more in here. He gave something up to be with Lois, but to get his powers back, he's got to give up what he's been hanging on to this whole time, is the visage of his family. And he's got to give that up in order to get his powers back, because he made the dumb mistake to give them up in the first place. I just like that dichotomy with our Superman character a little bit more. And Reeve plays that beautifully. He played it a little dark. I'm like, this is this is what I like. Not too dark, but just enough. But I like that sacrifice angle. And as far as my final thought with it, we didn't mention Sarah Douglas, who is, I think, the unsung villain in this film. She made the most of each of her scenes as the person who was just the right-hand man of Zod, and I thought she was actually fantastic in either cut. She's really good in this. It's understated because she doesn't get a lot of screen time, but she really, I'm like, yeah, she's cool. She could have played, if they would have did a Masters of the Universe, she easily could have done Evil Lynn,
yes,
instead of Meg Foster. Though I like Meg Foster's Evil, she could have done an Evil Lynn. So I mean, for me, both cuts, you're right. Both cuts are their own thing. Similar to, if you're a horror fan, you know the difference between those two Exorcist films they made. You had Dominion, and you had the other one, which was basically a recut, reshoot of the same movie. They're different experiences. I think they're both to be seen. In this case, though, where you get a lot of these director's cuts where you're like, okay, that was interesting, but I like the theatrical better. I like both of them for both what they are, and they're both entertaining to watch. It just depends on what mood you're in. If you're looking for something that's like one complete continuous story, one in the Donner cut. If you're looking for a fun one, and then an even more fun one that's all patriotic, he comes back flying, I'm sorry, Mr. President, I was away for too long, but that'll never happen again, because this is 1980 and we're in the Cold War and we need the patriotism. But anyway, they're both entertaining and they're both right. This is the first case in a long while where you get two different cuts of the same film, and they're both very watchable.
Yeah. And to put a cap on that sacrifice, Mark, he not only gives up his family, but at the end he destroys the Fortress of Solitude. And that's something that it underlines his commitment to, now I am going to be Superman, but I'm going to truly live among the people. I have nowhere else to go except to be among them and a hero to them. Although it is kind of strange, because that would seal Zod's fate, I imagine. Like, everybody fell into those chambers, and then this thing collapsed.
He was
on them,
almost out. He was,
almost
last 2 or
his
3
climb-
feet from the top, like Sam Waterston on the top of the mountain in Capricorn 1. But Superman was on the roof.
That's a cut scene I'd like to watch. But the other thing is, he also destroyed all the millions of years of Kryptonian history that were in those crystals. I mean, did he have a backup like crystal that he kept in his pocket or something? Like, can he download that? Because he ruined his own culture in an act of, like, I don't know, weird vandalism. But Mike,
close chance.
All right, man, bring it home for us. Final thoughts on Soups 2.
Oh,
Mike.
me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, well, Superman 2, it's a classic, but no, it's a movie that it's aged okay, but yeah, some of the visual effects are horrifyingly bad, and especially when you're talking about the Donner cut, yeah, some of the edits do look like they're kind of slapped together, but even with all of its problems, it has a charm and a timelessness to it that makes it work. Because Superman isn't cool because he can punch holes through people's faces or lift boulders or fly around the earth. He's cool. He's a great person because he's a great hero because he's something that we aspire to be. He's the beacon of hope that is humanity. And in that, you get that with the first 2 Superman films. I'll admit I haven't seen 3 or 4 because I heard they're but
oh, you're in for a treat. You gotta watch them.
Yeah, I heard
Reeve
3,
is the best.
Just from the audio commentary on 3, Richard Donner was saying it's just basically a Richard Pryor film where he would just go around and steal the show, and he's
bad concept. Reeve, for all the special effects we've talked about, the simple casting of the right actor, Christopher Reeve, in the role is the best special effect. And when the tagline was, this is our marketing talk here for you, Ian, you will believe a man can fly. I think we believed a man can fly really less because of the special effects and because of Reeve's commitment to every single inch of that screen.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you guys. It's been a lot of fun, not only watching a version of the film I'd never seen before, but also talking about it with you. We're going to take a break next week. But yeah, I think we'll be back in a couple of weeks, probably talking about some more summer movies as we officially slide into that season. Maybe some Spider-Man, maybe some Transformers, and then maybe another drop into the DC universe in the year 2023. So yeah, I'm excited for that. So everybody, thank you very much for hanging out. Those who watched this live, and or if you're watching this on the replay, thanks to David Wilt for the comments and getting us some stuff to think about and talk about. But most of all, thanks to Earth's Mightiest Critics, my lovely and talented panel. I am Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat. We've got Jeff York of the Establishing Shot, Mike Crowley of You'll Probably Agree, and Mark the Movie Man Krawczyk of the Spoiler Room and Special Mark Productions. All of their information and the rest of the EMC you can find down below in the description. And yeah, if you like this live stream, please like it, give it a thumbs up, ring the bell for notifications and all that stuff, and be sure and subscribe and follow all of my guests. Again, information down below. So with that, we're going to fly up and away from this live stream. Thanks, everybody. Good night. And I was going to say Excelsior, but that's a totally different universe. So